Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 16 wide receiver starter sits for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about news around the National Football League as it pertains to fantasy football, some injuries going into Week 16, so that you may be aware of them before we get to our championship games, starting this Saturday, in fact. Also, then after that, we're going to be going over the matchups at the wide receiver position at Week 16, which players have the most favorable or toughest matchups going into the week. And then we'll finish off with my top 36 rankings as we usually do. Before we begin, let me remind all of you, if you have not yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community, help us get to that 13,000 subscriber mark. I've been saying it for days now. We've already grown a little bit even more. I appreciate everybody who continues to subscribe to the channel. Also, don't forget to click the bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. And don't forget, if you like today's video, to click the like button. Thank you very much. Hey guys, how's it going? Hope everyone's doing really well. All right, so really quickly, to start off this video today, I want to go ahead and give you guys a little bit of an understanding of why I'm doing multiple videos a day. So yesterday I did quarterbacks and running backs. Today I'll do wide receivers, tight ends, because there is no Thursday night football game, so I'm taking the day off. But Saturday and Sunday I will be doing live streams each of those mornings. So I mean, as of right now, I think this coming Saturday, the first game starts at, let's go ahead and look this up really quickly. Probably should have looked this up before, but, impromptu. Okay, so the first game this coming Sunday is 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So what I'll be doing probably is I'll be starting my stream at 8 a.m. I will be here bright and early, 8 a.m. We'll start the stream. We'll answer some questions for the 3 games on Saturday, get a couple of your questions for the following day on Sunday, but then we will also on Sunday morning still be conducting a live stream at the probably normal time. I mean, last week I went at 8 a.m. because I know a lot of you have questions in terms of your fantasy championship games, and I want to try to get to everybody. So what we'll probably do is Saturday and Sunday morning, both 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I will be streaming here for 2 hours each day. And that'll be pretty much it, so that everyone's up to date, kind of understanding what the schedule currently is going into these Week 16. The following week, Week 17, we'll probably have something similar to it. I know there's holidays coming. It will be Christmas on Wednesday. And is it Christmas on Wednesday? Actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and look this up. Yeah, next Wednesday is literally Christmas. Wow. So is Andrew making videos on Christmas? Absolutely. All right. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and move on. And let's talk about some news around the National Football League as it pertains to fantasy football. A couple injury reports that I wanted to go over. A couple pieces of news. Daniel Jones has returned to practice and was working out with the starters today. So that looks like it may be the end of Eli Manning's career officially this week with Daniel Jones back in action, coming back from the ankle injury. As of right now, Mike Evans has been sent to the injured reserve. Chris Godwin out Wednesday, but he's probably not going to play. If they are smart, they're not going to play him. Again, it's a short week, and what I've heard is that he's not playing this Saturday, and in Week 17, you're not going to need him, so you don't have to worry about it. Drop Chris Godwin, go pick up somebody else, perhaps Rashad Perriman, like I mentioned many times this week. T.Y. Hilton's snap count will increase, according to Frank Wright of the Indianapolis Colts. I don't know what kind of report that is. There's all this OBJ news going around. But a couple of the most important pieces of news that you have to be aware of. Number one, Josh Jacobs, running back of the Oakland Raiders, officially will be held out of this Sunday's game against the Chargers. What does that mean? Right here, right now, as you are hearing this, I need you to go pick up DeAndre Washington. If he is not already owned, if someone dropped him somehow, go and pick up DeAndre Washington. It's ever so more important to have him on roster. He could be a starting running back this week and potentially a top 20 guy, certainly, against that rushing defense of the Los Angeles Chargers that has struggled at times this season. So again, DeAndre Washington needs to go be picked up. According to what I've read, the Raiders rookie running back Josh Jacobs will be held out of Sunday's game due to a lingering shoulder injury. Again, we all know that he's had a fractured shoulder for the last couple weeks and he's been playing through it. Man, I mean, that's a lot. I respect that a lot. Playing through an injury like that is incredible. And much respect to him playing through that. But, it takes its toll, and we're going to wrap it up there and, let him probably rest for the rest of the season. And then the last injury that I wanted to kind of go over, according to what I'm reading, it says Dak Prescott had an MRI on his right shoulder. Jason Garrett, quote unquote, said it's hard for him to function right now. So that's not good. He'll probably play Sunday, but I think this is going to be a Zeke game. We'll see where that goes and where that lies as the week progresses. Hopefully he's healthier as the week progresses, but we're going to go ahead and wait and see. Anyway, let's go and move on. Let's talk about matchups as we go into Week 16 at the wide receiver position. All right, let's see it. who gives up the most points to the wide receiver position on a weekly basis, on average in half PPR scoring format? Well, that is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which is really exciting because wide receivers like DeAndre Hopkins, Will Fuller, those guys, I mean, Kenny Stills last week had 2 receiving touchdowns. There's a lot of opportunity for a guy like Deshaun Watson to get it going, especially for how good Tampa Bay has been on the ground. They're going to stop Carlos Hyde, and it's going to be a pretty easy task at hand for, in my opinion, Deshaun Watson to light up this defense like a Christmas tree. So it should be pretty easy here. Speaking of Christmas trees, you know, the holidays are just around the corner, and I'm trying to bring fantasy presents out here. Okay, but anyway, moving on. In terms of the Tampa Bay secondary, again, they've been torched every single week. I mean, even last week when they were up, like 24-0 at halftime, I mean, they were up by a substantial margin. David Blau in the second half did come back, obviously threw a pick six, all that jazz. Their defense has gotten a lot of points in terms of scoring touchdowns, sacks, and all that. But they do get torched by wide receivers typically. And I think the skill of a DeAndre Hopkins and the speed of a guy like Will Fuller, Kenny Stills, they're going to be able to take advantage of the matchup this coming week. Okay, and then we have the Miami Dolphins. That game, that's a little sketchy right now. From what I've read, it's something close to like 75% chance of light rain. We'll see where that goes. Obviously, we'll have a better idea of where that stands this coming Sunday. It is in Florida, which is the biggest concern. If it's going to rain, it could be a mess of a game, especially for the wide receiver position of, whether it's, Tyler Boyd and or Devontae Parker, all those kind of guys. Moving on, the Philadelphia Eagles, giving up a lot of points. I mean, it doesn't matter who they play. Whether it's Slayton, whether it's Terry McLaurin, whether it's Devontae Parker, they all pop off against this secondary. And Amari Cooper is going to do exactly that. Amari Cooper is going to have a game, but it really depends if Dak Prescott's healthy. Anyway, moving on. The Detroit Lions playing against the Denver Broncos. Hopefully, Courtland Sutton can take advantage of this matchup. I'm expecting him to do so. That should be a fun one. Moving on, the New York Giants playing against Terry McLaurin, Dwayne Haskins. I think that's the only receiver I want to even touch in that offense, and I think he'll be pretty good this week. We'll talk about him in a little bit. And then moving on, we'll talk about the New Orleans Saints giving up some points to wide receivers. Again, this last week was a little different, but I think Ryan Tannehill, A.J. Brown, these guys have been on fire in the last couple of weeks. They're still fighting for their playoff lives, and I think if they can go ahead and compete this week in Tennessee, there's going to be a good chance that they could put up some points against this secondary for the Saints. Then we have the Carolina Panthers wide receivers, or Carolina Panthers defense giving up points to opposing wide receivers. Can T.Y. Hilton take advantage of this? I don't know. T.Y. Hilton's a very sketchy play. Zach Pascal didn't play very well this past week, and neither did Jacoby Brissett. And obviously, it trickles down from the quarterback to the wide receivers. It is always going to be an issue. So can we trust Brissett? That's the biggest question at hand this week, and whether or not we can play wide receivers from the Colts. Then we have the Minnesota Vikings. Devontae Adams, always a big play there. Outside of that, I'm not really interested in anybody else. Then we have the Minnesota Vikings. We went over the Vikings, sorry. The Arizona Cardinals, they will be subject to Russell Wilson, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf. No more Josh Gordon, but either way, I think those three will be able to pop off this week for some good points. Obviously, the running game will still be there. Hollister is going to be awesome. That should be a blowout, in my opinion, or maybe a shootout. Either way, I'm expecting the Seattle Seahawks to score a lot of points this coming week. And then we have the Indianapolis Colts on the opposite end of Will Grier, DJ Moore, and Curtis Samuel. We'll see how that turns out. Either way, these are some of the matchups, kind of give you guys some perspective. Obviously, the tougher matchups are below Pittsburgh, Dallas. I mean, Pittsburgh's not even that tough. Like, John Brown as a #1 wide receiver was actually pretty good. Like, just to kind of give you guys some perspective, I really don't think we're going to see like, oh, you know what, 100%. What's his name? Robbie Anderson is just going to be shut down. Like, I have a hard time believing that's the case. Like, I truly do believe I'm having a hard time believing that's the case. So as it currently stands, where is it? A wide receiver position for the, okay. So as of late, again, John Brown, 7 catches for 99 yards on 10 targets. The week before, Christian Kirk, 8 catches, 85 yards on 9 targets. The week before, Jarvis Landry, 6 catches, 76 yards, 11 targets. Tyler Boyd, the week before that, 5 for 101 and a touchdown on 9 targets. The week before that, we had Jarvis Landry again and Odell Beckham have pretty good games. Jarvis for 43 and a touchdown. The week before that, Robert Woods, 7 for 95. I mean, number one wide receivers are really going off against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. And now the question remains, is Robbie Anderson the number one, or is Jamison Crowder number one after that week? I still do think it's Robbie Anderson. And I think really there's a good matchup there. But anyway, we'll talk about everything in extent as of right now. So let's go ahead and let's talk about my top 36 running back rankings going into week 16. Starting off with my number one, it is no surprise, it is Michael Thomas at the top. Michael Thomas is insane. I mean, the amount of points he scored, like, I had a fantasy matchup. I was trying to get, okay, so this coming season, I will be in 4 finals, okay? I will be in 5 finals. Final championships, right? Out of the 13 leagues that I played in. So I tried to make the 6th league, and unfortunately, what happened was Michael Thomas, in the first quarter, killed my chances because he scored so many points. 12 for 12 last week, 130 some odd yards, a receiving touchdown. Michael Thomas is unstoppable. I'm sorry that if you have to play against him and you're subject to being Michael Thomas this week, it's unfortunate. And you really can't do anything about it because he is going to have a good week against Tennessee like he typically does. He is an absolute monster. Drew Brees is looking fantastic. The offense is looking great. They're relying heavily on the passing game, and that's all we can ask for as a Michael Thomas owner. He's my number one on the week. Moving on, we have DeAndre Hopkins as my number 2. Like I mentioned before, he plays against the easiest matchup on the week, playing against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense as the number 3 wide receiver in half PPR fantasy as of this moment in time. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be asked to do a lot this week, like he has for the last couple of weeks, passing over 119 receiving yards each of the last 2 weeks. Has dominated. This is a guy that even in tough matchups against Denver or New England will still get it done in terms of points. He is one of the top echelon wide receivers in the National Football League for a reason. And this coming week against Tampa Bay on Saturday, he's going to prove exactly that. Saturday morning, it's going to be fun to watch DeAndre Hopkins pop off. He's my number 2. Moving on to number 3, Julio Jones. You know, last week, I was questionable about Julio Jones and what he was going to be capable of doing. Because if he wasn't given the opportunity to run away with a game in which he is just popping off, I mean, the prior games, Julio Jones, 9.4, 11.7, 9.3, 9.1. And finally, he had a game worth his name. Like, Julio Jones has proven year after year to being one of, if not the best wide receivers in the National Football League. And we hadn't really seen him have a pop-off game in such a long time that finally, I mean, it hadn't been since week 8. He had 152 on 10 catches. This past week, 20 targets. That was 50. It was more than actually 50% of Matt Ryan's passing attempts went towards Julio Jones. 13 receptions, 134, and 2. I mean, that is an incredible stat line, and I really do not believe that the Jacksonville Jaguars will be able to stop Julio. They're going to try their very best. They're going to try their darnest, but Julio Jones, if he is fed the ball as such, will have another monster week. He's my number 3 on the week. Moving on to number 4, like I've mentioned before, Amari Cooper has had monster games. I mean, incredible games against the Philadelphia Eagles in the past. Going back to last year with that hat trick of a game, 3 receiving touchdowns in the single game. We've seen him have 40-plus point games against his defense because the secondary is very, very bad. And it's not like that's not the case right now. That's absolutely the case. In fact, the Philadelphia Eagles are giving up a lot of points. And sure, Amari Cooper, he struggled multiple times in the last couple of weeks. But because he's played against good cornerbacks, when you play against New England, we're not expecting him to play well. When you play against the Rams, we're not expecting him to play well because Stephon Gilmore and Jalen Ramsey, they are the best of the best at the position for a reason. There's a reason that they get the Pro Bowl votes, that they get so much respect, that they get paid as much as they do. It's because they are the best at what they do, and no matter who they go against, Amari Cooper doesn't matter. They're going to produce. So this coming week against Philadelphia, there is not a difficult matchup. He will feast, and hopefully Dak Prescott's healthy enough to deliver the ball to Amari Cooper. I expect him to have an amazing game. He's my number 4. Moving on to number 5, Tyreek Hill. Again, Tyreek Hill, inconsistencies here and there, but we want to see big performances as such. We want to see him find the end zone multiple times. Early in the game, it was very easy for him to pick up these touchdowns because, in fact, it wasn't snowing as hard. He got that easy. He broke the double coverage, found the back of the end zone on pretty much a crossing route, and made it easy. He made it look real easy. In fact, he almost had 3 touchdowns. The third one was picked off while he was in the end zone. The ball was a little short, came in a little delayed, double covering him again. Chicago is a better secondary, but again, you cannot cover this guy's speed. He will always be a threat to be 10-plus points or 10-point, floor to the 25-point 38-point maximum that we've seen before. He's incredible, and as of right now, at my number 5, I'm pretty confident with that. Moving on, we have number 6, Davante Adams, one of the guys that, again, consistently is getting it done on a weekly basis. He's finally becoming Davante Adams. You know, we hadn't seen a lot of Davante Adams this year because the turf toe and the offense kind of struggling in terms of trying to find their footing with this new offensive coordinator, with the new head coach. But as of late, in the last 3 weeks, or in fact, in the last 4 weeks, we have found Davante Adams. 2 games of over 100 yards, 4 total touchdowns in the last 5 games. I mean, he is being himself. That's exactly all we needed to see. This is a guy that over the last 3 seasons prior had scored 10-plus touchdowns every single year. And sure, he's not going to come close to that number unless he really makes a drive because he only has 4 this season. If he makes a drive at the next 2 weeks, then sure. But as of right now against Minnesota, a defense that is struggling, the cornerbacks that are struggling, Davante Adams typically plays well against them. Even when Xavier Rhodes was at the top of his game, his prime, Davante Adams has produced against them. Imagine now with them kind of slowing down in the secondary. I expect Davante Adams to play well on Monday night in that contest. Moving on, we have my number 7, Breshad Perriman. Now you may be thinking, Andrew, what? Yes, Breshad Perriman is my number 7 quarterback, and let me kind of give you some input as to why. Now, here's the thing. Mr. Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are both gone. They're not playing this week. So and Scotty Miller has been sent to the injured reserve. So who are the wide receivers for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? You have Breshad Perriman, you have Justin Watson, you have O.J. Howard, Cameron Brate, and then potentially, Agumba Wale, Ronald Jones out of the backfield. Those are the main contributors as of right now. What we've seen from Breshad Perriman in the last month of the season has been nothing but great. He has produced, even with, with Mike Evans going down and Chris Godwin going down and him being the number 1 wide receiver on this team and getting the coverage that he's gotten, he's been great. Not only that, he gets to take on Houston this week, guys. In the last 4 weeks, okay? I mean, just specifically the last 3 weeks, he's been great. 5 for 87, 3 for 70 and 1 touchdown, 5 for 113 and 3 touchdowns this past week. Yes, 3 touchdowns this past week. Why? Because Jameis Winston is on fire. Jameis Winston is delivering the ball to anyone with a heartbeat. He is moving the ball downfield. Sometimes it's to the other team. That's perfectly fine. He gets that out of gets it out of the way, and then he comes back and he delivers. The guy only caught the ball 5 times, and 3 of them were for touchdowns. Breshad Perriman, as you guys maybe this is a guy that's been in the league for quite some time and has notably been in the league because of his speed. He's been on the Browns. He's been on the Ravens. He's been around the National Football League. There was a year, if I'm not mistaken, Breshad Perriman was actually a pretty good wide receiver for the Ravens and Joe Flacco. Let me go ahead and confirm this. This is not a bad wide receiver at all. A lot of people kind of misconstrue. Yeah, going back a couple years ago in 2016, this was a 500-yard receiver for the Baltimore Ravens. He was one of these guys that contributed for that team. He's been in the league. He has contributed at times. So don't be like, oh, this is just a random coming out of nowhere. No. He's been in the league for 4 years. And he's really getting his opportunity here with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I expect him to be really good against the Houston Texans secondary. If they want to triple team him, sure. Make Jameis Winston throw to somebody else. That would be appreciated. But to be honest, I think Breshad Perriman's going to have a good week on Saturday. Moving on. A.J. Brown's been a break. A.J. Brown has been on fire. I don't know if there's been another wide receiver, or is there a better rookie wide receiver right now? I don't think so. I don't know if there's a better wide receiver that's had this late half resurgence. I mean, as soon as Ryan Tannehill took over, A.J. Brown has been something else. In the last 4 weeks, has passed up over 100 receiving yards 3 separate times, has scored 4 touchdowns, and has been an absolute monster. This past week against Houston, had 13 targets, 8 receptions. I mean, that is unbelievable. In the last 2 weeks, he's had 20 total targets. He is feasting, and it's not going to slow down, in my opinion. As Derrick Henry is dealing with his injuries, and they play in a game in which the Saints are a good run-stopping defense, it is going to force the hand of the Tennessee Titans to have to, without a doubt in my mind, play and pass the ball using Tannehill, A.J. Brown. Corey Davis already a little banged up. It's the A.J. Brown show. That is all. And I'm starting him just about over anybody. Outside of the top 7, he's a fantastic play this week. And my number 8. Moving on. we have Keenan Allen as my number 9. Keenan Allen has been pretty consistent in the last couple of weeks as well. This coming week plays against the Oakland Raiders, a very favorable matchup. In the last 5 weeks, Keenan Allen has been 10-plus points in half-point PPR scoring formats in fantasy. His reception counts, his target counts, they are increasing. It is all great news, and I love to see it. The thing was, last week, he ran a slant route in the red zone. He tripped. He would have scored a touchdown. He would have had a 20-point week last week. Fortunately, that wasn't the case for him in a half-point PPR scoring format. But again, plays against the Oakland Raiders should be a great matchup for him, and he should be able to feast on it. He's my number 9 wide receiver. Moving on, we have ourselves Allen Robinson at number 10. Allen Robinson has been, in my opinion, one of the biggest surprises of this season. I did not expect Allen Robinson to be as good as he was. I mean, when I think about Allen Robinson, I think of garbage time and I think of Blake Bortles, because that's the last time I saw Allen Robinson have a really decisively dominant season. 14 touchdowns in that year with Jacksonville. I mean, he was a different player back then. Now he's really kind of gotten back to that. He's really dominating at the position on a weekly basis in the last 4 weeks. I mean, it's just insane numbers. His target counts, 10, 12, 8, 14. I mean, that is incredible. His receiving yard counts, 131, 86, 48, 125. 4 receiving touchdowns in the last 4 weeks. Gets to take on the Kansas City Chiefs. I think the way that this offense is playing, with Mitchell Trubisky finally getting the ball out of his hands, feeding Anthony Miller, feeding Allen Robinson, both these guys are going to feast. Allen Robinson is the number 1 receiver for this team, has a very good opportunity to have himself another good week. He's my number 10. Moving on to number 11, Devontae Parker. Another one of these surprise wide receivers that I'm telling you, nobody expected to come out of the blue here. Devontae Parker is a monster. He will have decisive weeks that will win you or lose you games. But to be honest, in the last, since when? Since week 4, he really hasn't, outside of the concussion in week 14, done anything to lose you a week. And he is just on fire. There's a reason why they signed him for 4 years, $41 million deal last week, because they believe in this guy's future. They've given him time. He's finally grown into what they anticipated Devontae Parker to become, and he's delivering upon it in the last 3 weeks, outside of the concussion. You know, those 2 games, Philadelphia and the New York Giants matchups, 159-2, 72-2. The target count, 17 total in those couple of weeks. Plays Cincinnati this week. I know it's a little bit of weather conditions, but Devontae Parker is as good as they come. So he's my number 11. Moving on to number 12, we have Tyler Lockett. Finally, you're coming back to being normal. Tyler Lockett had 4 weeks of terrible performances. Week 10 against San Francisco, got injured and was gone. The following week hit the bye week. The following week after that, played injured, had 1 reception for 38 yards, terrible week. The following week after that against Minnesota, 3 targets, 0 receptions, 0 yards, terrible performance. Again, another terrible performance against the Rams, 4 for 43. Finally, it took a while, but we found Tyler Lockett again. 9 targets, 8 receptions, 120 receiving yards, and a touchdown last week. Now I have confidence in fully starting him. I don't know if you guys remember, but I'm telling you, maybe I gotta post a live stream or I gotta clip it out. Last week, I sat on that Sunday live stream and I sat there and I said, and I'm sure some of you will remember this, I'll clip it out, don't worry. I have a terrible feeling in my stomach that this week, Curtis Samuel and Tyler Lockett are both going to have great games. And what did they do? And I was like, and I'm trying to fight my gut feeling. And what did they both do? They both had amazing weeks. Not really surprised, because sometimes you can only go so long until you have that monster game. But I expect this week against Arizona, Tyler Lockett should be fantastic. There's nothing else needs to be said. They know that they need to get him incorporated in the passing game for them to be relevant, and they're going to do so. All right, moving on. Let's talk about my 13 through 24, my wide receiver 2s in the week. There we go. Starting off with my number 13, Julian Edelman. Okay, so here's the little concern, or a little, my thoughts on it. Edelman's dealing with like a shoulder, back, ankle, neck, every injury you could probably think of, he's dealing with it right now. That's concerning, because Edelman is typically a guy who, as of right now, is the number 6 wide receiver in fantasy. That is correct. He's the number 6 wide receiver in half PPR fantasy. But last week, he had his worst game of the season by a long shot. Why? Because this was the first time in 8 weeks that he had less than 10 targets. It's incredible. Julian Edelman consistently was getting fed targets. This last week only had 5 targets for 2 receptions, 9 yards. Again, they didn't need him against Cincinnati. Absolutely did not need him. But I thought he would have been better. This week against Buffalo, they need him. They need him to step up, and they need him to be present for this game. Unfortunately, the Buffalo matchup at times has been difficult for them. They're going to double team Julian Edelman just like every other team has done for the last couple weeks. He might get Tre'Davious White on him the entire game. And that is something that should be taken, shouldn't be taken too lightly. That is another one of these top echelon corners that really makes a difference in the National Football League. But again, I expect Edelman to probably step up. But again, he's dealing with injuries, has a tough matchup, might get double teamed the entire game. Just want to keep it out there. That's why he's not in the top 12. Coming off of a little bit of a banged up week at a pretty poor performance. All right, moving on. We have number 14, DJ Moore. Okay, so as of right now, DJ Moore, in my opinion, got snubbed for being, I guess he's not technically. I mean, when we think of the NFC and the Pro Bowl votes, right? We had Michael Thomas, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, and Julio Jones all make it on the NFC side. And they're all from the NFC South, no surprise. But there's another wide receiver in the NFC South that truly does deserve some notoriety this season, and it's DJ Moore. He has been absolutely incredible in the last couple weeks, and he is not slowing down. Obviously, there's a quarterback change coming in the near future, as in this coming week against the Indianapolis Colts. But I still do expect DJ Moore to have another good week here. I know you may be thinking, well, Kyle Allen likes to force feed DJ Moore. It doesn't matter. I believe Will Grier will come out and do the exact same thing. He's watched from the sidelines this entire season. He knows who to get the ball to. He's a good enough quarterback. And as of right now, I really feel like DJ Moore is still going to be one of these better wide receivers in Week 16. Moving on, let's talk about Anthony Miller. When we talked about Allen Robinson a couple minutes ago, you can't talk about Allen Robinson without mentioning Anthony Miller, because this is another one of these guys that, as of late, has really turned it on and becomes something else. Like, he truly, okay, let me go and find his stats, because Miller's target counts have just gone out of the ceiling and into a different dimension, and so have his performances. And it's 100% correlated, because when he started off the season with 1, 3, 3, 7 targets in those games, he wasn't producing because the opportunity wasn't there. There was too much Taylor Gabriel use. But as of late, 11, 9, 13, 4, 15, has had 10 plus points in fantasy 4 out of the last 4 weeks, has scored touchdowns each of the last 2 weeks, has gone over 100 yards twice in the last 3 weeks. He is feasting. When he's on the opposite side of a guy like Allen Robinson, who is dominating as well, it makes it that much easier, because teams have to respect Allen Robinson and have to perhaps give a little bit of leeway with perhaps just letting Anthony Miller, make plays. Close up the number 1 wide receiver, stop the run, let the number 2 feast. It's fine. And I think this week could be a potential of another one of these feasting weeks from Anthony Miller. He's my number 15 wide receiver. I have a lot of confidence in him. He's been really playing well as of late, and I'm glad to see it. I'm really glad to see it, especially going into his sophomore year. Started off slow, but he's getting some momentum that can hopefully keep pace onto next season. Moving on, we have Jarvis Landry as my number 16 wide receiver. As it currently stands, Jarvis Landry, again, between him and OBJ, I prefer playing Jarvis Landry every single week, and it's not even close in my eyes. But as it stands, Jarvis Landry has been a little bit slow in the last couple of weeks, yet his target counts have been there, 7 and 8. Sure, they're not the 10-plus targets that we want to see, but it is good enough, in my opinion, to where we will see a better week here. Typically, the Cleveland Browns have played very well against the Baltimore Ravens. You can go back to last year, week 17, 16. Baker Mayfield put up a fight in that game, and it was a very pass-heavy contest. And even earlier this season, we had Jarvis Landry go for what was it against the Baltimore Ravens? 8 catches for 167. His breakout performance prior to the streak of games that he really went on. So we've seen Jarvis Landry have good games. Obviously, everyone's going to be looking at OBJ. But while Jarvis Landry's cutting him up on the defense, we'll see him probably feast this week. The Pro Bowl selection is my number 16 on the week. Moving on to number 17, Stephon Diggs. From what I saw from Adam Thielen last week, Adam Thielen's not ready. He's not ready to return, and that's okay, because that's just only going to open up the door for Stephon Diggs to consistently be a great play. Stephon Diggs could have had a receiving touchdown last week. Unfortunately, Kirk Cousins did not put enough air on the ball. He made it a little bit short, but it happened. The touchdown went up to Mike Boone eventually, as they plunged it in. But Stephon Diggs, again, this is another one of these consistent wide receivers that is going to make plays. Sure, his reception count is not there as of like 5, 4, 6, 4. That's not great, but his yards per reception is there. He's catching the ball down the field. His depth of target is consistently there. And I expect in terms of this Green Bay matchup, who, wide receivers have been dominating at times for the last couple of weeks to be actually pretty decent. Like when I look at this, right? Anthony Miller went for 118, Al Robinson 125. Prior to that, we had Terry McLaurin go for 57 and a touchdown. The week before, Sterling Shepard 40 and a touchdown. The week before, Deebo Samuel 50 and a touchdown. Curtis Samuel the week before 35 and a touchdown. DJ Moore for 120 in that same week. The week before that, Mike Williams for 111. I mean, we've seen good wide receivers go off against this team consistently in the second half of the season. Maybe they're slowing down, and I'm hoping that's the case, and I'm hoping Stephon Diggs has himself another good week here. He's my number 17. Moving on to Courtland Sutton. Courtland Sutton has a very easy matchup, in my opinion, this week. He plays against the Detroit Lions, who's been, we talked about Rashad Perriman's stat line and what Godwin did last week. And, Scotty Miller, a lot of guys popped off against them. Sure, Courtland Sutton's performance last week wasn't incredible, but he got the targets, he got the yards. The reception count could have been better, especially for those in a half full PPR format. 10 targets, 4 receptions, 79 yards in a weather game as such. I really do think he will be a lot better this week, and he will be reliable enough to leave in your starting lineup. He's my number 18 on the week. Moving on to number 19. When we talk about Mike Williams, another one of these wide receivers that has been sneakily consistent as of late. To start off the season, Mike Williams was nothing. He wasn't a wide receiver too. I wouldn't even know how to classify him in terms of what he was getting in terms of targets and receptions. Just wasn't there. Wasn't scoring touchdowns. But of the last 3 weeks, he's had over 13 fantasy points every single game. Has had one over 100-yard performance, 2 touchdowns each in the last 2 weeks. One in the last 2 weeks each. He's been feasting in the last couple games. Sure, again, he's not catching the ball more than we'd like. In a PPR, it's less reliable, especially if he doesn't score a touchdown. But the Oakland matchup is far too easy in my eyes, and I really do expect him to play well in the matchup. Mike Williams, my number 19. Moving on to number 20, Sterling Shepard. When I think about Slayton or Shepard, and I think of the two of them, it really depends who's going to be playing quarterback. Daniel Jones could be the returning guy. Maybe it's Eli. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think to myself, Sterling Shepard is the number 1 wide receiver. He's probably going to have Josh Norman on him this week. And if we know anything, Josh Norman has given up so many touchdowns this season, so many big plays, so many receptions, that Sterling Shepard has a very good opportunity to feast. Again, last week, 111 receiving yards, 9 receptions, had a lot of targets against that Miami secondary. I think the Washington Redskins can be just as bad as that Washington secondary, and Sterling Shepard could really take advantage of it and be a great wide receiver option this week. He's my number 20. Moving on to 21, we have Robbie Anderson. Okay, so again, like I mentioned, Robbie Anderson, in my opinion, is still the number 1 wide receiver for this team. I mentioned it during the matchups portion that the Steelers have been pretty weak against number 1 wide receivers in the past 4, 5, 6 weeks of the season. We have seen some great performances from wide receivers, and I really do believe Robbie Anderson is not shy of having one here. We've seen Robbie Anderson, Sam Darnold have fantasy playoff championship performances going back to last year where they dominated in those weeks, and I'm hoping we're going to have a repeat this season sneakily. Robbie Anderson is my number 21. Moving on to number 22, Terry McLaurin. When we talk about this matchup, Terry McLaurin made majority of his value on that one play, 70-yard reception. But again, he scored a touchdown each of the last 2 weeks. Dwayne Haskins is improving. He is seeing more targets. And against the New York Giants, it's far too favorable of a matchup for me to pass it on. This is a guy that I want to start this week if I have the opportunity. I know many of you were asking, Andrew, why didn't you have Terry McLaurin on your waiver wire? If Terry McLaurin's not already owned in your league, you need to have already rostered him. You got to look at his schedule, and you got to know that these games are coming up. Just looking at it, Philadelphia and the Giants in week 15, 16, those are great matchups. Carolina in week 13, sure, he didn't perform on that matchup. But actually, you know what? Let's just look at since week 11. The Jets, the Detroit Lions, the Carolina Panthers, the Green Bay Packers, and the Philadelphia Eagles, and then the New York Giants. Those are fantastic matchups. He should have already been owned. But regardless, still some of you are playing in smaller team leagues. Not as many players are widely owned. I understand it. So either way, Terry McLaurin, a fantastic play this week. Should be great in my opinion. He's my number 22. Moving on to 23. That is right. I have Cooper Kupp as my number 23 because while Cooper Kupp hasn't been the same, Cooper Kupp isn't what he was earlier this season. And it's kind of hard to explain because sure, he's still technically producing numbers, but it's not at the wide margin that he was earlier this season. When I look at what Cooper Kupp did last week, he played 92% of the snaps, Comparatively to the week before, we only played 29. That's a big difference, right? But the issue that I had was he still only saw 6 targets. He caught those 6 receptions, and he caught 41 yards, and he has scored a touchdown each of the last 3 weeks. But my concern begins to kind of sit there when I think, can he produce on only, getting 4 targets a week? And now he plays San Francisco. When we go back and look at what he did against San Francisco, he had 6 targets. He had 4 receptions for only 17 yards. There is a lot of inconsistencies here with this Los Angeles Rams offense. And Cooper Kupp scares me. It really does. Now, I'm hoping he has a monster week, and I hope he comes through for many of you who have, pretty much rode his back into the championship because of his early season heroics of those monster 20-point games after one another. And as of late has been double digits, stud. But hopefully we're going to go ahead and see a little bit something better from a guy like Cooper Kupp. I'm expecting him to be, an average wide receiver too. But I'm worried again about the matchup against San Francisco. Moving on. We have number 24, Tyler Boyd. AJ Green's not coming back this season. Auden Tate's IR'd. And as it currently stands, Tyler Boyd's going to be playing against the Miami Dolphins. I honestly think Tyler Boyd could be better than the number 24 spot. As it currently stands, last week he had a lot of times where he was covered heavily by Stephon Gilmore. And that is unfortunate because Stephon Gilmore, like I mentioned before, is one of the best in the business. And as of right now, Tyler Boyd probably could have had a better game if it wasn't so heavily dictated by the presence of a guy like Stephon Gilmore. But again, I expect him to be great against the Miami Dolphins. Just about anybody is. And outside of all the wide receivers, all the options, they're going to be mixing game. This is going to be a Boyd game. I expect him to be pretty good this week. Moving on, let's close out today's video with my 25 through 36, my wide receiver 3, starting off with Conley/Chark. Now, to kind of give you guys some perspective, as of right now, this video is being recorded Wednesday morning. So I don't know exactly where this injury currently stands with Chark, but in my opinion, I think there's a possibility that Chark does play this week. If he does, we will rank him accordingly somewhere else. But what I'm expecting is that perhaps he doesn't. I would have Chris Conley as my number 25 wide receiver going into the week against the Atlanta Falcons. Again, we will have rankings subject to change. We will talk about it Saturday morning, Sunday morning, as it pertains to these two teams and whether or not these guys are going to be active. But again, I just wanted to kind of give you guys a little bit of perspective on and where I have them. But Conley right now, number 25. Chark would be higher, certainly, and Conley would kind of disappear if Chark was to come back. Let's go on and move on. Let's talk about my number 26, DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf, again, another one of these wide receivers that 10-plus points every week, kind of like a consistent thing for him. Now, unfortunately, Josh Gordon, he's no longer in the league. That kind of opens up more opportunity for DK Metcalf, run more routes, get some more opportunity here. But as of late, DK Metcalf, in the last 3 weeks, 75 receiving yards, 78, 36 and 1 touchdown this past week against Carolina. Arizona is a little bit of a different monster. He'll probably get shadowed by a guy like Patrick Peterson the entire game, but I still do expect them to get heavy involvement for their wide receivers, whether it's Slayton Metcalf or Lockett. I expect them to both be good. Metcalf, obviously not as good as a Lockett technically can be, but I expect Metcalf to still be a pretty good fantasy wide receiver 3 kind of threat. All right, moving on. Will Fuller's my number 27. I have a lot of hope that Will Fuller can dominate against Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm thinking another 4-touchdown game. That's what I want to see. Unfortunately, if we get one, that'd be great. And like maybe like 136 and 1. That'd be beautiful on 4 catches. Some like big play. That's what I want to see. But Will Fuller, as of late this past week, wasn't terrible. At least we got Will Fuller playing. That's all we want to do. We want to see Will Fuller play. As of right now, he's technically questionable for Saturday. Remained limited in practice on Wednesday. 7 targets, 5 receptions for 61 yards. Again, this is a guy that is going to consistently get injured. And hopefully he's healthy by Friday so that Saturday we're good to go with him. But again, we'll keep an eye on him. But either way, he always will have the big boom play ability. We saw that against the Tennessee Titans a couple weeks back where he went for 7 catches for 140. So he always has the capability of that big play ability. But again, we're trying to hope that he stays healthy. Moving on, number 28 is my Emmanuel Sanders. I expect the Rams matchup to be something of the sort where Deebo Samuel gets completely locked down for the entire game, does absolutely nothing, and Sanders is the guy that they're checking down to with Kittle while running the ball. And that is what I expect. I think Emmanuel Sanders is a good wide receiver. He certainly did not show up this past week, which is unfortunate, especially for those of you who played him and perhaps lost your fantasy week because of it, or could have potentially lost because of it. But Emmanuel Sanders has been a good wide receiver this season, but he has been slowing down as of late and been very inconsistent. That's my concern. You could just completely ignore this and don't worry about Emmanuel Sanders. But again, there's I don't know. I feel like there's a good chance for him to actually have a good game. I'm not sure if it's going to come true, but as of right now, we'll just go ahead and wait and see how this goes. What am I looking for? I'm looking for his. I thought he had a better game that week. Maybe I'm mistaken. All right, moving on. Maybe my ranking on Emmanuel Sanders needs to be adjusted. I thought he played against the Rams earlier this season. I could have swore he played against the Rams and he scored. Am I wrong in that assumption? I think, yeah, I am wrong. Interesting. All right, no problem. We'll adjust it. That's why Saturdays and Sundays are that. Boom, moving on. 29, Robert Woods. I think Robert Woods, he's a wide receiver I want to play. But my concern relies upon how much garbage time are these Rams going to get. If they get garbage time, then sure, Robert Woods could be of value. He disappeared this past week, unfortunately, because of, just where the game script is at. But Robert Woods went from being one of the most targeted wide receivers on this team to just being straight ignored, but not really. 9 targets again this past week, but his depth of target wasn't there. Only 4 receptions for 17 yards. They tried to use him on some bubble screens. They tried to get him involved somehow, but it just wasn't there. So they just kind of stopped knocking on the door and went towards Higbee. They went towards Kupp. They went towards Brandon Cooks and Gurley, and they got other people involved. They had to do it, but hopefully this week we get a bounce back week from Robert Woods. Moving on to Kenny Golladay at number 30. Again, he'll have Chris Harris Jr. on him. I know Kareem Jackson is out for the Broncos, but he's going to have Chris Harris Jr. on his ass the entire game. That is something that is a little concerning, but again, Kenny Golladay is one of the better wide receivers in the National Football League, but has been struggling as of late. Therefore, he sits at my number 30 spot. Let's go to move on to number 31, Marquise Brown. Marquise Hollywood Brown is an on and off kind of player. He could have a big week and then he could show up and do absolutely nothing. That is the volatility of this kind of a player. He again is a similar to Tyreek Hill kind of guy where he has deadly speed. He has the ability to take the top off the defense, but at the same time, because of his speed, a lot of corners respect him, play off about 10 to 8 yards, and he gets a lot of short yardage of possibilities here and there. Hopefully, we could get a blowout in which the Ravens are feeding all their wide receivers. Marquise Brown could have another great week here, and therefore he sits at my number 31. Number 32, Michael Gallup. Here's my concern with Michael Gallup. I think with Dak Prescott's arm and the fact that there are so many contributing wide receivers or receiving options to this offense. You have Cooper, you have Zeke, you have Witten, you have Jarwin, you have Randall Cobb, and you have Tavon Austin. Michael Gallup sometimes will just be an afterthought in this offense, which is unfortunate, but that's just how this offense works at times. I'm hoping he can have a great game, but again, there are a lot of mouths to feed in this offense, and if Dak is going to be a little bit banged up, perhaps feeding the wide receiver position becomes an afterthought after Amari Cooper. Moving on to number 33, T.Y. Hilton. If he's going to get more opportunity, I think the Panthers matchup is probably one of the best for him on the season. He can certainly, in my opinion, potentially have himself, the best game of his season this week. If he's healthy and ready to go and Jacoby Brissett can light him up, I really do think T.Y. Hilton could be a great play. But again, he's got to be a wide receiver 3 play at very best, in my opinion. Moving on, Darius Slayton is my number 34. Again, Slayton in the last couple of weeks, very easy matchups, has produced with Eli Manning, and that's all we could really ask for. We've seen him produce with with Daniel Jones multiple times, whether it was against the New York Jets or the Detroit Lions earlier this season. He has produced with Daniel Jones, and if Daniel Jones is to return this week, then we should see still another great performance out of him. But again, we have to understand there are a lot of other mouths to feed in this offense. Saquon Barkley, Sterling Shepard, Golden Tate, 3 guys that really can make plays in the passing game against a defense like the Washington Redskins. Slayton could come up short. But again, I still think he will have a pretty decent game this coming week. He's my number 34. Moving on to 35, Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk scares me because Kyler Murray is so inconsistent, wildly inconsistent, in fact. And he doesn't really have a number 1 wide receiver. We had Byard, Bird, whatever you want to call him, this past week. Lead the team in receiving yards and receptions, while the week before it was Christian Kirk by a wide margin. And unfortunately, we just keep going back and forth with this Christian Kirk inconsistency. So he'll sit at 35 at this point. Moving on to number 36, we have ourselves Cole Beasley. All right, so here's the conversation I need to have. John Brown will have Stephon Gilmore on him. OBJ will probably have Marcus Peters or something of that sort on him, and that's why they're not here. Cole Beasley will probably be the shining star of this offense against the New England Patriots this week, in my opinion. I think there's got to be someone to catch the ball for the Buffalo Bills, and it's probably going to be Beasley underneath, making majority of the plays. So he'll have to be my number 36 here this week. Thank you, everybody, for watching. That is pretty much the entire rundown of my Week 16 wide receiver rankings, start and sits, kind of give you guys some perspective on how I see this week breaking down. Appreciate everybody's watching. If you haven't yet already, click that subscribe button, click the like button on today's video. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, which will be my tight end video later this afternoon, I appreciate everybody. Thank you, and I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.